You're recording.
Hello, my name is Dorsay Dujon, and this is September 28th, 2008. I'm here with Mr. Bill Freeman in his lovely home in Silver Lake. Bill, this is absolutely gorgeous. Thank you for having us here today. And we'd like to talk to you about your life, your business, maybe even a little bit about what's going on in the country today and the changes. And tell us about where you're from and how you came to Los Angeles.
Well, I was born in Oklahoma. My people in Oklahoma were, at that point, colored and Indian. On my mother's side, they're Seminole and Creek. On my father's side are Cherokees. And as it turns out, my great-grandmother came from Madagascar as a Malaysian Arab. Her mother was a Malaysian Arab slave through a union with a white physician, Scottish physician. So that's the background of kind of what my parentage is. They tell me that my people ran away when they got off the boat and went to live among the Seminoles. And they ended up in Oklahoma in the Trail of Tears. Which means that as Oklahoma developed, my people ended up with property. The Grayson Ranch, I think, still exists. No, it was sold recently outside of Clearview, Oklahoma, on Grassy Lake. And supposedly my grandparents supped with the governor of the state and etc. That caused a problem because my grandmother married what is called a state-raised black.
What does that mean?
I'm sorry, I'm surprised you don't know what those are, but you don't come from that section of the country.
No.
Well, as it turns out, there are two types of blacks in Oklahoma, essentially. They're the ones who come from the Indian nations, and they're called freedmen. And the ones who come from out of slavery were state-raised.
Does your name have something to do with this?
Probably really not, but anyway, it's very stratified. Because of the land and money, etc., freedmen blacks don't associate very well with state-raised blacks. No freedman father wants his daughter to marry a state-raised black. And even though my grandfather was literate, he married my grandmother, who was Indian black, a native born. When she died in her late 30s, they depossessed the estate, the ranch that they were on. They just took.
They did. They meaning the state?
No, the Indians.
Yeah.
Oh, the Indians
The
took it back.
family. See, the rule in Oklahoma is, at that time was, no male could inherit property from an Indian, quote, maiden, unless everybody in the tribe, you got tribe and you got clan, and the immediate clan agreed. Now, how did this come by? There's a thing called the Dawes Commission that it divided up Oklahoma when they found out that there was oil, and gave the land, quote, to the individual Indians instead of the tribe, and had a land run of the rest of the land so they could get the land. You know, this was one of those typical take over the land things. Well, a white guy would come along, marry an Indian maiden, she'd end up missing, and he'd end up with the land.
Mm.
So they put together a law that said that, hey, if the tribe does not, the clan doesn't agree, you can't have the land. So that's one of the Indian laws, because the Indian nations, quote, are a sovereign nations. They can do this. So anyway, when my grandmother died, they separated all the kids and put them in different places. My mother happened to have gone to one of the richer side. The aunt who raised me went to one of the poor side. She ended up as a sharecropper on one of the other ranches. She ended up poor. My mother ended up in the better side of the family. Now, when I was born, there's another Indian law that no child will be present without both a mother and a father. My father died 5 months before I was born it was an automobile and gas accident.
Well, about what year was that?
1933, because I was born in 1934. He died in about December or so in 1933. His name was Frank Freeman. And so they told my mother, you have a choice. He can either go to the state home or else you can keep him. But if you keep him, you will have to go. That's that whole story, the kid tossed out into the that thing. Well, she elected, an aunt took me, and I was raised by that aunt after 2 months. Although I saw my mother now and then, I pretty much was alienated from my mother for the next 60 years.
60?
Yes, the next 60 years. Because when I finished high school in Wetumpka, Oklahoma, living with my grandmother on my father's side, because my grandmother later, when I was 7 years old, she had no kids other than my father. When I was 7 years old, she showed up at my aunt's house and said, is this my grandson? My aunt had 7 other kids that she could barely feed, and they cut a deal where I could go to live with my grandmother, because she had nothing. She and my grandfather, when I first met my grandfather, see, you would have to come out of a poverty situation to kind of understand this. There was one room, and the kids slept in the same bed. The boys slept with their feet toward the center, and the girls slept with their feet toward the center in the same 2 beds, until you got to be 12 or 14, and then you couldn't sleep in the same bed anymore. That kind of thing. Well, it was very, very poverty-ridden. Now, on the other hand, my grandmother and grandfather, when I first saw him, he was a guy with cowboy boots, blue jeans, a vest, and Stetson hat, and she was very starched and proper, and the whole a mid-class, as you would, Oklahoma ranch farm people. So I went to live with them. Now my Judeo-Christian background came from my grandmother's. My grandfather. My grandfather was the superintendent of the church. My grandmother was a clerk of the church. And they were real Christians.
How was that change for you, going from being with your aunt to being with your grandmother? Were you happy about this change?
Well, I had been passed around so much until this, it didn't matter. I was very happy with my grandparents because I had my own bed. I had plenty to eat. I was never hungry. And the kind of place I lived with when I lived with my aunt, I did, in one of my compositions, when I was later performing, I did a poem on that, as a matter of fact. In the rusty old stove, the fire was dead, with the snow on the floor and the foot of the bed. You need not look twice to see that he was hungry and cold. Let me tell you the story he told. Because actually, the planks that you could see, like so, there was cracks in between the planks. There was no insulation, the house. There were outside planks, pine planks. And you took paste and you pasted newspaper over the cracks, and you stuffed it with rags to keep the elements out. And actually, we did have to, on occasion, get up and shift the snow off the blankets or quilts, as it were, before we made the fire, because if you didn't, the bed would get wet. So I went from that to living in this utopia. So certainly I was happy with living with my grandparents. Now again, as I say, they were truly fundamental Christians. That's like no comic books on Sunday, no listening to the radio on Sunday. I once asked my grandmother, how do I know something is a sin? And she said, if it's good to you and you like it, it's probably a sin.
That's funny.
So you should come and ask me. I had read the entire Bible, Old and New Testaments, by the time I was 8 years old. They thought I was going to become a minister because I was so well acquainted with the Bible. And switching reels to now, at 74 years old, I have an extensive library upstairs on the history of the Bible and history of comparative religions and et cetera, et cetera. I could talk to you at length about the commonality of Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, where the changes are and what the difference are, and the fact is there's only one God. You may choose to call him Allah. Somebody else may choose to call him Yevitz. Somebody else may choose to call him Jehovah, or somebody may call him Allah. There's not but one. And this big fight that everybody's having about my God and their God and it's one. They all worship the same one by a different name. But we won't go into all of that business. Another thing is, as you can see from here, that whole shelf up there is history. This is the literature here. My Judeo library is upstairs, and a number of other things on contemporary politics and et cetera, et cetera. I call it looking at the whole chessboard and the maneuvering of mankind by the 5%ers. Now, having said that, I'm not socialist, I'm not anti-anything. I just tell it the way it is. 5% of the people in the world run the whole thing and control anywhere from 10 to 25% of the assets of the whole world. That's just the way it is, And every time there's a war or something or the other, I go into my books and find out what do they have that we want, and what do they have that somebody else wants. Are they just going down there because they think it's nice to go in there, or is it religion, or is it money?
And what's
9 times out of 10, it's money.
What's happening in this country now?
Let me get to that. Let's go forward.
Okay.
Yeah,
because
let's get his history first.
Before I regress. So, living on a ranch, I became a bibliophile. I read a lot. And I became the valedictorian of my high school. I ended up at Black's University, Langston University, because my mother was at Langston University as a teacher. I stayed there for 1 semester and then went to the school where she had graduated from, the University of Denver. Now that was a transition of going from a black kid who was the #1 person both there and in my freshman class at Langston to the University of Denver, where you're nobody. Because even as highly competitive as I was probably still academically below the norm in that school. Because there were certain things I would have never been exposed to. For example, I've never been exposed to Latin. In a small school in Oklahoma, or in a small school in Langston University, You're not exposed to certain things and certain philosophies. Somebody hits you with Machiavellian, you don't have any idea what the Machiavellian concept is because you came out of a school that was lesser. I was lucky from one standpoint. In my freshman year, I was exposed to one M.B. Tolson. Tolson was the father of modern Negro literature support. You will probably have heard of him recently from The Great Debaters, because he was the character that was portrayed in The Great Debaters. That was the M.B. Tolson that was at Langston.
The young fellow that ends the movie winning the debate.
Mm-mm.
No?
He was the teacher.
Oh, he was that was Denzel.
Denzel was Tolson.
Yeah. I love that movie.
And I can remember even to the day, M.B. Tolson. Black Curtis Adams taught us how to die. Long before white Patrick Henry's bugle breath shouted those immortal words, "Give us liberty or give us death." This is M.B. Tolson. Mr. Freeman, you're slouching. Sit up. Stick your chest out, as puny as it may be. Stick it out. Be proud of yourself. Freeman, think about what your name, think what it is, think what it means. You're somebody. Act like you're somebody. Be somebody. Learn words, the symbol of ideas. Because as a master of words, you become a master of the universe. You become a second-class citizen only if you think of yourself as second class. Rise above the masses. That was M.B. Tolson. My 1 year exposure to M.B. Tolson, who put me on a certain type of track.
About what year was that?
1952.
When did that movie, The Great Debaters, what period of time did that cover?
It came just
30s.
Before that.
Yeah.
I was in the 40s. It was just before that because he was at Wiley probably at that time in Texas. And he had to get out of there because of his politics. Now, everything being said, I never knew that he was a socialist and communist until I saw the movie. I never knew he was that. But what he did, he had already been in Harlem and then gone to Texas, and then he got run out of Texas. He went back to Harlem, and then he ended up in Oklahoma as the head of the Department of Literature and English at Langston University.
A little interesting piece of historical fact, I have not proven it yet, but the great debate in that movie was supposedly between a small Negro college and Harvard, and it actually was between that college and the USC debating team here in Southern California.
It was? Okay.
But Harvard sounded better for the movie, I guess.
Okay. So, yeah, that was before he came. He that notoriety had taken place before he came to Langston University. Well, after my freshman year at Langston, I ended up University of Denver. At Langston University, I was in art school because my real love is art and music. Like I haven't painted recently, but I do have some around here. And I perform all the time. My last performance was last Sunday night.
This is the flamenco.
Will be next Sunday.
The flamenco guitar.
Have
you ever played at El Cid?
Yes, many times. Many times. And when I left Langston University and got to the University of Denver, because I was good in the things that they did teach well, in math and chemistry, people convinced me that, hey, as a black, you're not going to make a living as an artist. Aesthetically, that's wonderful. But the real world is you need something that you can make a living at. You don't play ball, you don't sing, you don't do any of those things.
Unless you're Spike Lee.
Well, this is many years later.
Yeah.
You know? So, you're talking 30 to 50 years later, certainly. But in 1952, it wasn't going to happen. Here, you could be a great artist, but to sell, you weren't going to sell. enough to be able to keep your stomach full. So I went into physical sciences, and that's where I've been ever since, even to now owning my business, engineering business in Newport Beach. So I've had two parallel lives all of my life. My degrees are BS in organic chemistry, masters in physical chemistry, some letters in chemical engineering, PhD work UCLA in quantum chemistry, and the other UC, the college down here, LA City College in Music and Art, and a lot of other things in corporate management. A lot of certificates in corporate management. So what happened is, my picture once was hung in the Department of Urban Affairs as outstanding aerospace scientist, because I was one of the liaisons for the space shuttle from Downey, where the space shuttle itself was designed and put together, to Cape Kennedy, which is where the launch vehicle is. I was a liaison for the maneuvering system.
A working model.
That's the second stage. My systems were the systems up front here. That this turns the vehicle this way and this way. This one inserts it into orbit, the orbital maneuvering system. When it's in orbit, these takes it to where it's going. If you want to go up or down, you had to use the reaction control systems here, and the reaction control system here. That was my thing for years. And those were wonderful experiences as a black too. Being the liaison, because at first they were sitting whites down, until the Air Force on occasion said, where's Bill Freeman? Because they were asking, we had to go down and brief the NASA, and they were asking questions that couldn't be answered. And this one colonel said, where's Bill Freeman? I talk to him all the time. And they said, well, he was busy doing other things. We'll get him down here. So they called me on and said, we need you to be down here tomorrow.
Do you think that oversight was deliberate on their part?
Oh yes, because when I did the reaction control system, I was the first one to fire the experimental reaction control systems in my facility in Downey.
Well, this is something that school children should know about.
My pictures were not taken with it. The white guy's picture was taken when they did it. That's the whole story of what affirmative action wasn't, and why black scientists don't appear here and there and the other places. And but anyway, I'm not bitter about any of those things. It's just things that happen.
It's an extraordinary part of your experience,
yes,
to have to go through that.
Yeah, but I was a liaison for one of the liaisons for the space shuttle, and as a matter of fact, when they had the fire for the Apollo, which came from before the space shuttle, I was flying zero gravity at Dayton doing experimental studies on the propulsion system when the fire happened. And I told them, hey, I can tell you exactly why that happened. When I got back to Downey, they told me you cannot talk. It's proprietary information and it's secret information, and they caused me not to talk about it. Now, a friend of mine who got jacked up about it, who's now passed away, he was a West Point person. He was a vice president at that time. And we had gotten together because he was also a lounge pianist, and he was very much into music, and that's how we had gotten together. And I asked him, his name was Lee Gray, I asked him, Lee, why are you taking the fall? He says, Bill, when you're from the point, you play the game. It's my turn in the barrel. I said, but look, you're going to get hung. He says, no, they'll hide me, and I'll resurface. And that's the way they do. If you make a mistake and you do something and you're from the point, they'll put you in another position. He ended up vice president in another company. But the real reason why that thing happened is because they wanted a flight before the election. And we were not ready. They insisted that we had to have that flight. And I could tell you in detail what the problem was in the command module, but I'd have to calculate to see if it's 35 years yet, because when you do this, and aside, another thing at Doubtway Proving Ground, where I worked on weapons of mass destruction, you also had to be quiet for 35 years. I'll give you a tidbit. When they were yelling and screaming about Saddam Hussein and showing pictures, I could tell you exactly which one of the munitions it was, because I recognized the marking on the casings that they had sold to Iraq before the Iraq-Iran war. The minute I saw the picture, I said, those are such and such and such and such. They came from such and such a place, because I had inspected and tested those same. Yes.
So they were ours.
They were ours. But they had been sold to Iraq, but they were ours. And there were only those particular munitions. We were the only ones who had them. And the technology, there are only 2 countries in the world who has them. But these are the kind of things that never come out in this great end game that's being played. You never hear anything about it. In my mind, it says, hey, Saddam Hussein will never get to testify about the collusion between the United States and Iraq with regard to weapons of mass destruction. He will never testify. But anyway, we're way back ahead of how after leaving the University of Denver.
Well, bring us as I've got another tape. I'm not worried about the tape time. We're about 28 minutes into this. What I'd like you to do is, if you can for us, is sum up and get to your moving here and your business in Newport.
Okay, well, after I finished the University of Denver, I went to Doubtway Proving Ground. I spoke just a moment about being a research person at Doubtway Proving Ground for the Department of Defense, doing weapons of mass destruction.
Could I ask you to back up to how you got there? Because coming from an artistic background and then you get into the sciences.
My degree was in science.
I mean, that's amazing. Usually an artist, not that you can't have other interests, as obviously
Well,
you do,
his vocation in education was science, but his avocation were the arts.
Yes.
Okay.
And I continued to do that. When I went back to the University of Denver, as a matter of fact, when I was at a Doubtway Proving Ground, it was a technical detachment of soldiers, some of which were artists and musicians during their time in the Army. And when I went back to the University of Denver to get another degree because I felt pretty dumb. All these great scientists and people around, I need some more education. So after I went back. I finished my bachelor, and I went back for my master's degree. And I fell back into hanging out with the artists. I was reading plays and playing, at that time, folk guitar, not flamenco, but folk guitar. I got interested in flamenco at that time. And one of the reasons why I left after finishing my when I was working on my master's, one of my ex-roommates was working in aerospace. He says, hey, they need somebody with your background because of these exotic chemicals that we're dealing with as a propulsion system. So I went to work at Martin Marietta, which became Martin Aerospace, which became Martin Marietta, because the propulsion system is a highly chemical oriented fuel, chemically oriented fuels, and I went to work in that stuff as a research person. And because I was at that weapon system, the ICBM, Titan ICBMs, uses the same system that boosts the space shuttle. So I was recruited because of my knowledge of these propulsion systems from Martin Aerospace to North American Aviation, which became Space Systems. That's how I got here. Meanwhile, my interest in coming to California was because at that time I had started playing flamenco guitar. And one of the persons who was one of the better teachers had come through the university, and I wanted to study with him out here. So actually what happened is when I got to California, I could really do my artistic thing, and I could do my dishwashing thing. And my dishwashing thing was science. I've always pretty much considered, even though my pitch, as I say, is hanging, I was really good as an outstanding scientist. But I always considered that as, if I was an actor, well, I have a job down washing dishes until my next part comes along. Well, science has always been what I make a living at. And it has afforded me to be the artist that I wanted to be. And the reason why the two is kind of meshed is every 8 years, the budget fluctuates in aerospace and any of the government jobs. Just like the things going on in Sacramento now. It's up and it's down. And when it's down, they cut people. And when it's up, the people go back to work. Well, I had a specialty where I was not easily cut, but I could cut a deal. So I would go to my supervisor and say, hey, what do you need? What do we got going? He said, well, things kind of slow. I said, well, what about 3 months off? And he said, well, yeah, call me when things keep in touch, so when things start picking up again and I need to bring you back, I can. So I would go to Spain, I go to Paris and hang out with Jacques Brel, Charles Aznavour, and all those other people. And then I would go down to Spain and Madrid and Sevilla and study with the gypsies and do all that kind of stuff. And I check back in and say, hey, Bob Rugel is my supervisor, and what's going on? He said, well, I guess about after they do the end of the fiscal year in July, probably will kick up some stuff, and you probably will think about coming back in here about October. So I'd come back.
You had the best of both worlds.
Absolutely the best.
So I'd come back, and in Spain, I was studying 10 hours a day. Classical flamenco, 10 hours a day. So I would take that material, and I would come back.
Bloody fingertips.
No, what you do is you put toothache medicine on your fingertips because they're so tender you can't play. You dumb them down. That's the way I was that dedicated to playing. And then I'd come back and I would polish my material until the next couple of years, and then I'd go back to Spain.
Could we get you later, at the end of this interview, to play something on your
Sure.
flamenco guitar?
I'd knock any little thing off in about 2 minutes. And so I ended up out here. I ended up as a tenant to that property over there. Margaret Katz, who was a card-carrying communist, I mean, she's serious. I used to say, Margaret Katz would get her tennis shoes up and her and her placard for any reason whatsoever. If it said socialism, she was out in the street waving the placard.
Well, she wasn't alone. The history of our neighborhoods, Echo Park and Silver Lake, has a lot of socialists and communists.
That house next door belonged to a Cuban communist before Margaret Katz bought it. And I bought it from Margaret Katz.
We'll take a walk around later because
Okay.
you own another property.
And I own one right
You
there.
the turquoise one.
No,
No?
the next one to the turquoise.
Oh, the
Down
one
here.
by the steps.
Yeah, the one by the steps.
That's how we met him. Of course, we came up the steps with dogs barking at our heels. Lynn and I and her dog. And
So I came here in 1963. I lived in Baldwin Hills. I had never lived in a ghetto before. Well, it's not really a ghetto because a ghetto is a place where you keep people against their wish. You know, it's
it
not
was
a ghetto.
more like a colonization more than anything, because
it's you know, it's where people herd together
with common interests.
with common interests, but it's not a ghetto because nobody's keeping them down there. They don't have to stay down there if you don't want to. You can leave. I lived there for 2 years, I guess. Yeah, about two and a half years. And I decided this is not me because I had lived in an integrated situation ever since I left Oklahoma. I had lived I could say I lived almost entirely. That's not quite true because there were 15 blacks at the University of Denver. So I lived essentially the rest of my life in the integrated, quote, Anglo world, or Anglicized world. So the things that I was doing and the things that I wanted to do, the friends that I had were a little bit hesitant to come down into the black section. So it was limiting. And that's when I moved up here. Now when I moved up here, I moved in the apartment.
About when
next
was
door.
that?
1966. And after 1966, I went to Spain and came back. And in 1973, I bought that complex. Because Margaret's kids were getting out of school and out of high school. And she was wanting to do something else. So I bought it. It was in ratty shape, really ratty shape. And I worked on it for the next 10 years, bringing it up. The rent went from $135 a month up to now $2,400 for an apartment because I redesigned it engineering-wise and revamped the whole thing. And continued to work as an aerospace engineer until 1970. I bought it in 73, and then those was the space shuttle years until about 1978 to 79. Then I left system development. I left the space division and went to a computer house, System Development Corporation, in 79, and continued that work. I got out of essentially government work and went into public sector work. I worked there for 7.5 years. Meanwhile, in 1986, I bought this place and the place down the hill. And when I came up here, as it still is, I was the only black person on the cul-de-sac. I do have a tenant now who's from not Ghana. Ghana's in Africa, right?
Yes, sir.
Ghanaian then is in
Guyana?
Guyana is off the coast of South America.
Mhm.
He is a university professor, and he's bi-coastal. He's now in New York. He teaches in New York. His wife is in the film business. She's doing a documentary on my life. We've been shooting for 2 years. We've gone back to the ranch and shot up lots of film. She's editing and doing whatever with it now. I still got to go back and shoot the University of Denver and Newport Beach, and that's it.
Did you, when you moved into the neighborhood, did you experience any racial overtones? Any?
Well, in the first place, Margaret Katz was a born again communist. You know, she was very, very out there from a social, and I didn't know it, but she was using me as a blockbuster. I didn't know that, but that was what was going on. And no, I did not experience any racial thing. This cul-de-sac has never had one racial overtone in the some 40 years that I lived up here. They call me the Byron of Cicero Drive or the mayor of Cicero Drive. I'm probably the only person that knows everybody around here. And I always have in all the years that I've been here. It doesn't help that it helps that I'm an engineer and a craftsman, because you know I can practically fix anything that's broken. I tell you how to fix it. I tell you how not to get ripped off.
You're
So
very.
your neighbors come and talk to you.
You're a
about
very.
that?
Yeah, he's a very high class handyman.
That's what I was just doing when you guys came up. I was up in the top place changing out, and my tenant wanted some ugly looking 50s fixtures, those great looking Victorian fixtures that I had. She wanted them taken out, and she wanted some plain ones, so I was wondering.
Tell us about.
There has never been a racial issue on this block that
Excellent.
I know of. And let's see.
What's
At
changed?
this time, the Filipinos was living across the street. I had a Mexican tenant upstairs. There's a Mexican and an Italian living down there.
Well, Silver Lake and Echo Park and this general area is very well integrated. We have a little bit of everything here, and we have been interviewing a lot of different people, and everyone seems to get along just very nicely. And if they have any ill feelings, they keep it to themselves.
I don't think the place is exactly overrun with people of color.
Not overrun.
I think
We have no "there goes the neighborhood" attitude here at all. It's you have company, racially speaking, in the neighborhood, but true, it's not. Probably the white representation is more than 50%. We have a lot of Latinos. By Latinos, I mean Mexicans, Salvadorans, a lot of Filipinos down in my part of Silver Lake.
up in the hills.
No.
We don't. Silver Lake.
Silver-
Lake does not cross the canyon as quiet as it's kept. And it
Silver
doesn't
Lake.
and Michael Terreno. That's not Silver Lake as quiet as it's
Well-
to us.
Well, okay, I live in what I call Baja Silver Lake, which is down by the Hollywood Freeway. And we have a little bit of everything down there, not you elite people up here.
We never go south of Sunset. We know what's over.
we
We
know.
know what's south of Sunset.
We know, yeah. We've been fighting that on the neighborhood council to try and get more events down in those neighborhoods, because those people live in what is officially called Silver Lake as well. And we have some problems with
Not
that
so you
occasionally.
mention it.
Tell us about your business down in Newport. When did you start that?
Okay, when I was Assistant Development Corporation, when I went into the private sector, it was about the time they were having a huge problem with energy and gas, etc. And I got involved in prudent management operation of power plants in the basin, SLHC, Southern California, Edison, and some in the East Coast, etc. And that was my thing until they decided to sell my department, my division. And some people who had been working with me talked me into, hey Bill, why don't you, with your management background and experience, I once was an expert witness team to the California Public Utility Commission on the operation of power plants and what was wrong with them, what was good about them, and that kind of thing, and what LADWP needed to do to clean up their act, and Southern California Edison needed to do to clean up their act. So when I went down to Newport Beach and actually started working. I intended to do engineering in the same arena, but what they wanted was warm bodies. So what I ended up by, my business is a engineering help service. I rent specialists to these companies for short-term projects. For example, right now I have road, bridges, and dams for the county of Los Angeles. The civil and electrical inspectors are my people. What they do is they go in and see that the contractors do what they said they were going to do when they were doing something for the county. The same thing for Southern California Edison. My construction management reps go in and see that they give them a contract, they issue them a contract to do a project on substation, for example. Substation, think of that box in the corner there. When the lights go off, you flip it on or off, the panel box. Whereas there's a great big one sitting on the edge of it, right across, for example, down on Riverside Drive across from that apartment complex.
Mhm.
That big, that's a substation. What it is a big panel box for this section of the city.
So they control the power
It controls the power
for this section,
to this
which
section.
is what? How many square miles?
Who knows? Edison's got 50,000 square miles of it, but they got 1 billion of them around.
But if we have an electrical problem, it could have
Come
resulted
from
from
there.
there.
Come from there. They have, but that's not the only ones. They're all over. Would
Is
you
that
like me to
bothering
move
you?
that?
No,
It doesn't
no, it's-
bother me. I can move it.
Yeah, it
It's
was just
easy.
blowing up over your neck. I thought maybe it was bothering you.
No, this-
It's all right.
There's a system.
It was a nice effect earlier on when it was just blowing
Okay.
not
No,
on you. It's okay.
Okay, because I have it fixed so it's controllable. That's engineering me. There are a lot of them. There are a lot of substations. You got the Rocky Redondo Beach ones, the ones that, a lot of them, especially along the Redondo Beach and El Segundo, Seal Beach, they're all over. There's if you go right on up the freeway, the Glendale Freeway, and get at the end of the Glendale Freeway, there's a huge one that's a Glendale power plant. And they have substation all along their line.
So you
Burbank has them
you
all along
provide
their line.
you are like you provide consultants and engineers to on a freelance basis to solve problems,
Well,
make installations.
it's called as needed. As needed.
That sums it up.
Well, it's cost effective for the city or for the GWP or whoever's going to utilize your services, not to have you on their payroll
Yes.
all year round, but to bring you in as necessary.
Just give you an example. Floods. That's one of some of my people do flood controls, inspections. They essentially, they'll stop in about a month. What is it, October now? Coming into October?
Almost.
Okay, they'll go off, and they won't come back until May, June, maybe July.
So they're out in other parts of the country.
No, they're not doing
Just here.
anything.
No, I mean when they're in season, they're in other parts of the country, or is it just here?
No, my people only work here.
Oh, okay.
Most of those people are retired engineers. These are all senior people. I have another section of people that are the also-rans, but these are on tape. I shouldn't say this because it'll get around somewhere, but I'll say it anyway. They're called rubby dubs. These are the people who are undegreed and not really professional. I have some of those too. And they're not, some of them are craftspersons, some of them are below craftspersons.
But they're gaining a tremendous amount of experience.
Yes. But the kind of people I have are like all degree people, 20 to 30 years experience, or 40 years experience in engineering. They're the kind of people that if you come up and ask them a question, they can answer like
Sorry,
that.
pardon me all. Tell us about, I think we're pretty much up to date on where you've been and who you are and what you're doing right now. Are you comfortable? Because I'd like him to talk about your house, because he is,
Okay.
is there anything that you want to cover?
That's fine.
Because we have about 9 more minutes on this tape, and then I'll change tapes, and we can do a tour.
Okay, we haven't asked about your family life and children.
What you see is what you get.
Okay.
I have no children. I have never been married, and I have no children.
But you have a girlfriend. Her name is Anne.
And she's beautiful.
And you go tango dancing.
Yes, I go tango dancing.
I love that with the flamenco. Two wonderful cultures.
Yeah, on Halloween I will be doing flamenco, performing flamenco, and I will be playing for some tango dancers.
Wonderful. Where will you do this?
LA Dance Experience in Westwood. And then on the next day I will be doing flamenco up in Bel Air. Yeah, it is in Bel Air. It's a big party. Those people are the friends who love opera and friends who love ballet. And they bring in entertainers, mostly who are Broadway singers and opera singers, or show tune singers. In my case, I happen to can do some of both, but I only do flamenco when I'm doing it then. Like the person who used to own the Café del Opera, Mario, who used to right here on Vermont. He's there. And Carlo Massini will be there. And a number of other people.
So
about 10 acts.
I'm planning a delayed, after the fact, birthday get together for myself at El Cid. How about coming along?
That's fine. I can do that.
I'll make sure you get invited.
I don't know who's playing there because
I don't
I've
either.
gone to El Cid in a while, but for some 30 years I knew every flamenco practically in Los Angeles.
Just a note for the tape. El Cid is a flamenco club on Sunset Boulevard that has been in its same location for 50 years. And it's one of the few venues for flamenco in Southern California, apart from the touring companies that come through here and play at places like the Pantages or the Wilshire Theater, whatever. So I have never been to a show there. I went in to check it out. I went in to check it out in anticipation of getting a group of friends together to go there. And we talked to the bartender, and we were to meet one of the owners, but they didn't show up. So it was a weeknight, which is the best time to go. But anyway, historically significant.
Well, the thing is, since I'm a senior citizen, most of the flamencos that used to hang out at El Cid has either passed away or gone away. There's a new bunch, a new younger group there, so I'm not sure I'll even know them. I know Jack did own the place the last time I was in there, but I think they said he sold it. And Clark Allen owned it for years. He and Margarita. He studied in Spain, and she was from there. Yeah, this particular house, as was all three of the places that I have, were all falling down when I bought them. My thing is I only buy distressed properties with good bones. When I bought this house, part of the stuff wasn't there. I actually have about $300 worth of books on Mississippi and Louisiana style houses upstairs, and I put this facade on to this common.
What was the facade prior to your changing it?
I could show you pictures of it
That'd be great.
with it falling down. I don't know if you could capture it from there.
Well, what we'll do, tell us more about the house. We have about another 8 minutes, and then we'll change tapes and batteries, and we'll do a tour, and then you can put any photos down, and I'll shoot right in on them.
Okay, this was a very plain room. Here, it's a plain room with nothing in it.
Except for the ceiling.
It's for the ceiling. That's been scraped and redone, and the walls. I drew up a design because I wanted an English-style library. I went to a place called the Barn that used to sell this bookcase like so. And these are plain bookcases with the treatment on them. I put these different treatments on these plain bookcases. The doors, for example, to get the paneling on the side, I cut the doors in half and made paneling on the sides. These things. I stripped out these doors. They are the original doors. Some, I guess, 1923, 26 doors. I would never do that again because it's not cost effective. I would buy new doors.
It's a huge job.
Yeah. And I re-insulated the house and bought here and there antique pieces and made this into what it is from buying pieces. On that door there, for example, the parts, some parts of it came from the, some parts of this came from the bullet Wilson. This used to be one of the closets. Well, I have to move that for a second. This used to be one of the dressing room.
Careful.
From the dressing room on one of the Bullock Wilshire's dressing rooms.
Oh.
And I bought it, and this was the opening and closing handles. And I did like Hertz Castle, and I designed the things in. So all of this has been put in. This stuff I bought and fabricated and put all of it in. The house is, if you were up looking around, this is the original heating system. I left it because that heating system is gravity fed and it can heat the house. In 15 minutes I can heat this section of the house. Very, very, very cheaply. Now, if you look at the top, you will notice that it has a forced air heating and air conditioning. So the whole system has a modern system in it that will keep this place at 74 degrees. Being an engineer, what I've done is put 13 inches of insulation all over the house. The reason is it will be about this cool. I almost never turn on the air conditioner because it will keep it about this cool. And what I've done with the windows in here, except the jealousies, is I've taken plate glass and I've doubled or tripled the glass. And you do that by taking a glass, you put a piece of wood in between, silicone it, put another one in, another glass in, then put another glass. And it just cuts the heat down because of the dead space in between the glass. So this house, my bedroom, I can heat with a 200-watt bulb because of the insulation.
Even on the coldest days in
On the coldest
February?
days.
Wow. That's
It's
excellent.
it's use of insulation. The way you look, insulation is very, very, very cheap. And the way you use materials, it's like what the Eskimos is doing and what the Hopis were doing in New Mexico, and except you really don't need 14-inch walls. With modern materials, you can do that same thing without having 14-inch walls. And my whole thing was set for when I finally retire, to bring my cost of living down to less than $1,000 a month. And that's what the plan was, to make it so I don't have to spend money on heat and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Ways to, in your senior years. Now, as quiet as it's kept, I'm a multi-millionaire and I don't really need any of that. But it's a challenge to how do you get things done. The other thing in this house is this house has brass valves all over the place. If I got a leak in that shower, I can turn that bathroom off so that I don't have to worry about wasting money and utilities and dripping water, etc. Each one of the systems has got its own brass valve and access panel where I can go in. I can cut all the valves off.
Well, then I
You had to install all that?
I did.
You did it yourself?
Myself and the guys from down on the corner. I did all of it. If you look at my hand very carefully, you would see the burn marks from one day when it was the end of the day, and I was sweating copper, and I decided I had a leak, and I decided, no, I can hit that one. I don't have to put my gloves on, and I didn't, and it splattered when steam blew it out, and stuff like that. Yes, I actually do all my work myself.
This is a good place to stop. We're just about